Hello, welcome everybody. This is another interview about LionWeb or with LionWeb participants or members about their involvement and why they are involved. My name is Markus Völter. I was the interviewee last time. This time I'm the interviewer because Federico is the interviewee. And since he can't interview himself, I guess we needed to find somebody, and that somebody is me. I'm still, the background is a bit strange because I'm still more or less in bed with my broken leg, but I have lots of time because I can't do anything. So it's a great opportunity to do the interview. Hi, Federico.
Hi, Marcus.
So let me introduce you a little bit. Federico has been a long-time member of the language engineering and MPS communities, starting, I guess, with your work in 2011 at Fortis on Embedder, right?
Yes, for which, by the way, I should thank you for all the support that you gave me at the time.
No. That was not a point. But since then, you have founded Strumenta. I called it a boutique consulting and development company, right?
Yeah.
Like small but beautiful, focused on all things language engineering. And you're also one of the more regular conference speakers, and you publish tutorials and articles and stuff, mostly on LinkedIn, and of course on your website. And you do a lot of stuff in the open source community, which is a nice segue to LionWeb. So, why did you decide to join LionWeb?
Well, I think for me, the LangDev conference was a very important moment where I noticed there were a lot of very interesting ideas, like people working on type system, people working on interpreters, people working on code generators, on editor on the web. And I like a lot of these things. I mean, a lot of this solution had a nice bit and a not so nice rest. So I really thought if I could take the best of everything, it would be great. And so on a more practical level, I thought about that. On the other hand, I remember about my time as a PhD student and how frustrating it was that, if you wanted to make any meaningful contribution, you had to do a lot of legwork to create some basic stuff. And I didn't really have the time, so it was really impossible. So I was thinking, if we have this common shared base on which people can plug in meaningful contribution, that will really be a totally different world.
Mm. Yeah, that's something that I was also annoyed by, especially when I was still more involved in academic conferences, where every university that dealt with language engineering built their own complete stack from the ground up, usually worse than what was already available. And then at the time when they could add something like meaningful, then the PhD student left. So they just built another base stack instead of doing interesting stuff. So yeah, I agree. The infrastructure should be commodified, right? And then, yeah. So is that the main way how you think that LionWeb will benefit the community, acting as this kind of foundational layer on top of which to innovate?
Yes. So I think it will lower the barrier for innovation, but also permit to make more valuable solutions, because if I could combine the best interpreter with the best code generator with a great web editor and so on, I can put together a solution that at this stage no one can put together. Also considering that most actors are relatively small and they have maybe the resources to do one thing decently, but not a lot of things.
I obviously totally agree. So in addition to working with MPS and all its projectional magic, you also work a lot with parser-based tools in the context, mostly, I guess, of legacy modernization and for building kind of small-ish utility-style DSLs. How do you see LionWeb helping there?
Well, there are different ways in which I think LionWeb can help. Well, first of all, when we perform legacy modernization, typically we want to use some parser and combine it with some module for model-to-model transformation and some code generators. These same modules could be useful also for other projects. For example, a DSL could want to generate a Java or Kotlin to be executed. In some other cases, we have also used interpreter for implementing legacy modernization. For example, an interpreter for RPG. So this module could be reusing in that context. And then I forgot what else I wanted to say.
So, but you would basically use the LionWeb meta model and meta models based on built on top of that to represent the result of the parsing, for example, RPG, and then assuming there is lots of LionWeb based transformers and generators and stuff, then of course from there on it's much less work.
Yes, and I remember now what I wanted also to say that we can also have a lot of facilities that can work on all sort of models, like models repositories, but also tools to perform analysis of large models. For example, in the context of legacy modernization, it's interesting to be able to parse a large application, put all DSTs in a model repository, and then run some statistics to find which statements are more frequently used, or if there are certain patterns or group of statements used together in a certain way. And these kind of facilities can be used for all sort of languages. So it would make sense to have them built by someone and reused by everyone else.
Yeah. So have you already integrated some of your parsing and text language transformation utility things that you built at Strumenta with LionWeb?
Yes, in two ways. And first way, I tried something more experimental. So I tried to make all of our system extend LionWeb itself, so that they were natively supporting LionWeb. But then I thought that maybe we will still evolve a little bit LionWeb in the coming months. So I added another mechanism to have compatibility with LionWeb, that is an export and import facility, so that we can use it with the current version of our frameworks.
And by the way, you can definitely mention the name of your frameworks. I didn't because I couldn't remember. But if you Lazu, Star Lazu, Pi Lazu,
yes,
and all the other Lazus.
The name is terrible, but we originally started with the one in Kotlin, so created Colazu for Kotlin language support. But then we needed one for Python, one for TypeScript, and one for C#. In the end, we called them Star Lazu, like in the sense of an asterisk Lazu, all sort of Lazu.
Yeah.
I probably should not be authorized to give names to things.
You can ask me for name suggestions. I came up with great names like Better and IETS3. So I'm great at naming.
Okay.
This was a joke for the non-involved people here. So what are you working on? What are you working on at the moment in the context of LionWeb? What's your personal most relevant or interesting aspect?
I don't know if it's interesting, but the main thing I'm working on is the implementation of the boring layer that we need for Java. And as we said before, there is a lot of boring legwork that all people needs to replicate every time they start a modeling solution. So we're trying to write this boring thing here as a library so that people can reuse it. And so that is what I'm focusing on the most. Other things that I and my colleague Alessio will work in the future could be, support for Python, for example, and maybe a toy model server that we use just to store models to then perform statistics without versioning, without support for multiple users at the same time.
Yeah, because your use case is basically import from legacy system, do analysis, throw it away, import another one. So you don't have this repository as the core lifecycle supporting thing. It's just a temporary storage for the past result.
Exactly. Yeah. So put it for now on MongoDB. We are experimenting with Neo4j. and we save stuff, do analysis, or attach some web application to visualize something, and that's it.
By the way, dear audience member who is watching this, if you notice or wonder why these questions that we are asking each other are kind of repetitive and always the same, that's intended, right? The idea is to basically have the same framework for these short conversations and get everybody's perspective on these questions. So continuing in that vein, what do you think we need to make LionWeb successful?
That's a good question. I wish.
Yeah, you came up with it. So.
Oh, okay. So I shouldn't say that. No, I think that we need more people on board and using this thing, because it's an ecosystem, so it's valuable only if people are on it. It's like the network effect, like Facebook. Like everyone is on Facebook, then it's valuable. Otherwise, it's not. So I think that having a couple of good tools compatible with LionWeb could be a good start. And then maybe collaboration with universities, because if a bunch of master students, PhD students start using it and maybe finding some bugs, or maybe writing a tutorial, or maybe showcase some interesting solution, then I think it can help us refine the solution, but also, having people start using it and providing feedback. Yeah.
Obviously, you already had at least one good idea already regarding how we can, quote, advertise, which is these videos. I mean, these were your idea, right? But do we have any other ideas what we can do to kind of broadcast the message further to get more people to join?
Well, besides advertising it at the Nest Langdev, or maybe reach out at people in the EMF community, that, because in a way, I see LionWeb as a sort of new version of EMF built 20 years later with support for the web and with support for different languages, so not just Java. So these are the main differentiator. But if people are willing to to consider moving from EMF to LionWeb, or use them together, because there is an import-export facility also. I mean, we should test it if it works, but there is one. So maybe that could be one thing. And for the rest, probably reach out to some professor and write on modelinglanguages.com.
Yeah, that's one thing we talked about last time specifically, right? And then we could probably actually, talk to we both have kind of friends and acquaintances in the academic world. This is maybe 20 kind of usual suspect-y kind of language engineering profs around, maybe mostly Europe. We could systematically ping them and make them aware of this thing. So that would probably also be a concrete step. Cool. Anything else you want to add?
No, just that I think this has the potential to be quite exciting, because could maybe lower the entry barrier for a lot of people, putting our energies together. So I have big hopes for LionWeb. So let's hope the rest of the world agrees with these ideas.
Yes, I'm going to join you in that hope. So that's a hopeful message to the end, towards the end of this interview is always good.
Good.
All right, Federico, thank you very much for being a guest here.
Thank you.